There's a man who reads a lot of pages. To everyone he meets, he reads them pages. With every book he reads, he has to take the lead. Odds are he will smash you by tomorrow. Secret, ancient man. Secret, ancient man. He's crushing his opponents with every book he can. Several weeks ago, my colleague Paul and I released a video titled Fomenko, Scaliger, and Nibiru. And that stirred up the pot. A couple of weeks after that, a group titling themselves The New Kids they made a video and called Paul and I out as government agents of deception. That's right. And the new kids, they are Fomenkians. That's my new word, Fomenkians. They study Fomenkology. That means they study the chronology of Anatoly Fomenko. And I got another word for them, IDIOS. IDIOS. Now, we're going to jump a lot deeper now into the ancient authors and the manuscripts that brought them about. And I still have not read Fomenko. I don't care to. I need to keep my mind clear. But Paul, he's been checking deeper into it. And it appears that it's a whole lot more silly and ridiculous than we ever thought. And we're just having a blast with it. And we hope you have fun with this video. Enjoy yourself. Thank you. Now, I'm going to do a few shoots here in the new shrine. It's not completed yet. And I've been shooting videos of it, me renovating this old camper as a library to put my books in. I'm going to be building shelves everywhere. I've still got about 30-40 totes to go through. And I have been videotaping along, and when I get it finished, I'm going to put together a video and walk you through it, take you on a tour through the shrine and show you my books and such. And I didn't have a place to lay all of my classics out, so this is the set for now. And as you see, have all these green and red books. These are Harvard classics right here. And this isn't all of my Harvard classics. I've still got 10 or 15 that I can't find yet. But it's most of them. And through the years, I've probably given, oh gosh, 20 away. I had my Theophrastus, I loaned my Theophrastus set to a guy. Went back a couple of weeks later and he'd moved. Never heard from him again. But these are the Harvard classics. The red ones are Latin. The green ones are Greek. And got all these classical authors here. Right here are Penguin classics. I'll save some money sometimes and just go buy a cheaper classic. Have something to read. Here's some more classics up here. And these right here, these two are Jacobi. And they are for sale. I'm sure that a lot of Fomenkians have never even heard of Jacobi. And right here is the books that I used in the scanning of what I'm showing concerning the manuscripts of all these books here. And these books have been read many, many times. I know these books so well. All of these have been read many times, and such up here. Some of them have been read so many times by me and Paul that the jackets are just destroyed on them. And so many good authors in here. Livy, Tertullian, Tetrabilia, Ptolemy Tetrabilius, on and on and on. Just great. And like I say, I have read probably another 30 or 40 that are not here. And a lot of times when I'm reading these, or every time I'm reading them, I make notes in the front of the book. And I showed remains of Old Latin that I'm using. And here's the remains of Old Latin, number 2. And this right here is the remains of Old Latin number 4, volume 4. And 3 is around here somewhere. And here's another jewel, Select Papyri. These books right here, plus so many of the others, they prove the Fomenkian chronology is just nothing but a wash. And that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at it, we're going to study where these manuscripts came from and why there's so much confusion concerning the chronology of ancient history. We are first going to look at Appian's Roman History, Volume 1. And most of these are Volume 1. There's not but like 2 or 3 that just stand alone. And when it says Volume 1, that means I have the whole set. I have the whole set of any of these that I've got of Volume 1. And we see here on page 8, the earliest detailed account of his works that has reached us is that of Photius, Patriarch of Constantinople, who died in 891 AD. Okay, he died in 891 AD, so that means, and he couldn't write any more past that, could he? And then he wrote another book, Notices of 280 Authors. And I'm going to show this right here. This is pretty interesting here and here. These are pretty interesting. But I'm just showing that the original manuscript that we have today, or actually not the original, but the one copied, the earliest, dates before 891 AD. Now you can make whatever you want to of the date. Now we're looking at APPIAN, Metamorphoses, Volume 1, and it's red, so that means it's Latin. Green is Greek, red is Latin. And APPIAN, Metamorphoses, this is an ancient fictional novel. It's also titled The Golden Ass, and it's about a man that turns into a donkey and then tries to turn himself back. And it's loaded with heavy adult content. Now we're going to look at page 13. And right here, introduction. The text of Metamorphoses has come down to us in approximately 40 manuscripts. Later ones are most certainly direct descendants of the earliest, produced in the Benedictine monastery at Monte Cassino in the 11th century. Okay, so it's written in like 1000 AD or 11th century AD, and the Benedictines had it at Monte Cassino. Monte Cassino is in central Italy, kind of southeast, but more east of Rome. And well, who took it back? If it was written here, who took it? Who grabbed it from Monte Cassino and then brought it to light for our modern day people, or even up to the 1500s? Monte Cassino. This is Arian, Volume 1 again. And here they're talking about a 15th century manuscript at Paris, and they're always labeled so that when they're writing about them further on in the text here, they don't have to put everything about this manuscript. They just put B, and you know it's the Paris manuscript. Da 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 da. Okay, they had this manuscript from the 1400s, and this guy here, Rus, he noticed that this one, along with all the other manuscripts, were actually copied from an extant codex in Vienna. That was labeled A, written about 1200 AD. Well, that's near way in front of Scaliger, I would say. I had mentioned somewhere earlier about how when I put notes and stuff in the fronts of these books, a lot of them, my notes that is, I put in, use ancient Latin, Greek, and Punic characters. Just to give you some idea. It keeps me up on my alphabets, Keeps me up on my phonetics. You got to stay sharp on your alphabets. Just picked a few here at random, as you can see. Here's another one. Have very poor handwriting, no matter what what script it is. Just to show you. This is Dio's Roman History, Volume 1, as you can see here. And here on page 27, talking about some of the manuscripts. Here's one from the 11th century, from the 11th century. Here they have actually 11 manuscripts here. It's talking about some more of the other, and there's pages of bickering back and forth concerning this manuscript had this word out, this page must have been torn out, etc., etc. And here on page 28, I'm talking about the oldest Dio, which Dio can be Dio or Cassius, Dio Cassius. It's all the same guy. And here we're talking about this manuscript here, labeled V, vellum manuscript. That means it's on either sheepskin or goatskin of the 5th or 6th century in unsealed characters. That means basically capital letters, which would still be a capital for names and such, but the lowercase would still be written in capital letters. And it was a very popular style of writing in the 5th or 6th century AD. Let's go to Dionysius of Halicarnasses, which today his name has been changed to Dionysius of Halicarnasses. It's all the same. Volume 1 again. Page 31. We're talking here a little bit about how the history is broken up. The Greek historians were confronted with an awkward problem synchronizing Roman and Greek dates. The solution, apparently followed by Dionysius and probably by Polybius and Diodorus Siculus also, was to adopt the later Roman year of uniform length for all periods of Roman history, and to identify a given Roman year with the Olympiatic year in the course of which it began, rather than with that in which it ended, as in the modern practice. The dates given in the notes of the present edition follow this principle, only a single year being indicated as the modern equivalent of the Greek year, instead of parts of 2 years. Thus, Olympiad 7-1 is identified as 751 BC instead of 752-1. The only exceptions are a few dates of non-Roman events. And that's a real good background of what actually happened. And that can, help somebody try to figure out more concerning our calendar and how they did come back and date these Roman years with the Olympiatic years. And now picking up on page 38, shows these manuscripts here. And he gives what 900s here, 900 to 1000s here, and then they've got all these others from the 16th and 15th centuries. And some of the ones that were like for 15th century, they actually had the century beyond it. They actually had those first. Manuscripts used by Jacobi. Before you start thinking I'm some kind of crazy idiot nut job from Georgia, let's jump sideways for just a second. I got something fun to show you. Okay, this grammar test came up online, and it said test your grammar, and had 25 questions. So I said, well, I'll just click on it, have some fun. These come up every now and then. It says you passed. Your score is a 25 of 25. Now, right here, down here at the bottom, it says, congratulations, you are a grammar master. You have a superb understanding of even the trickiest grammar rules. Not only do you know the difference between affect and effect, but you also never confuse your tenses. You must be an English scholar because only 4% of Americans can get a perfect score on this test. Here we have Herodian, History of the Empire, Volume 1. The most important codices can be divided into two groups as follows. Group O, and these three manuscripts come from the 1400s, and here you can see how they refer to them. Page 84, Group I. And this codex dates from the 11th century. Here's one from the 1400s. This was found in the library at Medici, or the Medici family library in Florence. Here's Juvenal and Persius. Pages 74 and 75. This manuscript is by no means a very ancient manuscript. Get this. It dates only from the end of the 9th century, 800s. It's only 1,200 years old. What? Yeah, you go figure. Here's another manuscript that they had. It went through many hands, dating from the 10th century. This is interesting. Over against P and its small cluster of kinsfolk stand the several hundreds of Juvenal's vulgar manuscripts dating from the 9th century. Here's another one here from the 9th century, talking about all these manuscripts from the 9th century. That's 800s. Pages 76 and 77. And this manuscript, now in the Vatican, it is assigned to the end of the 4th century. What? Yeah, the end of the 300s. I guess we could call that one right there pretty ancient, couldn't we? Of these three manuscripts, all dating from the 9th century, here's another one, of the 11th century, most ancient of all is this one here from the 4th century. And here we have a listing of the old manuscripts of Juvenal from the oldest up to the newest of the main ones. So I took another one of these online tests that just passed in, just for fun. Just for fun. This was an IQ test. And what it came back is I got an A+, Rocket Scientist Smart. See right there it is. Now, I don't guess there's any way to, well, why would anybody want to try to fake any of this? And then right here in the caption, it says, congratulations, you aced this one. Did you Google the answers to this quiz? No, I did not. We don't believe you cheated. So that means you are a bona fide genius, right here. Based on the amount of time you spent on each question, we've determined you have a real knack for solving thoughtful problems. So it was timed. You are one of the few people willing to put in the time to understand a problem before selecting an answer. And boy, did it pay off. Only 3% of test takers do as well as you did, and it is impossible to do better than you. Great job. Oh, I guess I got every question correct. We doubt any of your family or friends will do as well as you did, but it will be fun to see the results. I'm just having fun. I'm just having fun minding my own business. Thought that was cute. Recently, the Fomenkians have started to show the book. Okay, see here's the book. Here's the book. And then they will go right back to a PDF and pull up a PDF that's got all these fancy colors on it and everything. But they hold up a book. How do you know that's what came out of that book? They show you the book. Yeah, here's the book. And then they go right back to a PDF. Never in one of my history videos will you ever see a PDF. I always scan the page and show you the page, show you the book. They say, oh, wow, you know, now showing the book is important. It always has been important. When did showing the book become important to you? And one of the disciples is sitting there and he's got his books in back of him, you know, and the preacher asks him, he goes, so how long have you been reading these books? And he goes, oh, I started buying these books and reading them like 5 years ago. 5 years ago. And I guess he wakes up some morning, wipes the sleep from his eyes, sits up in bed and goes, I want to start reading classical history. And in 5 years, I will be a classical history expert. After 5 years. Well, unfortunately for them, I've been reading these books here for decades. For decades. Some of them are in terrible condition. They got notes and lines all through them. Don't hand me a book and tell me I can't put lines in there to write in it. It ain't going to happen. Unless it's like 300 years old. Then, you know, that's my cutoff point. So anyway, I just find it ironic that after 5 years you can become an ancient history expert. Suetonius, Volume 1. And I'm not going to be explaining what these writers were writing about. You know, like this guy wrote about the lives of the Caesars, etc. Because that's not, I want to kind of streamline this. And here under manuscripts, he's talking about, this seems to have been the only one in existence at the time, and it is known to us from a letter of Servatus Lupus, Abbot of Fures, of the year 884. So it's pretty old. And here on pages 20 and 21, you see this codex dates back to the 800s. Here's one back to the 1000s, 11th century, 12th century, 12th century, 14th century, 1300s. Let's look at the next page. Pages 22 and 23. 12th century, 12th century, 12th century. Here's one from the 9th century. Here's one from the 13th century. The 1200s. The Fomenkians, they must be completely unaware of all the new discoveries that are taking place. All the discoveries from the early, from the 1930s in England, where they found a fort and a ship and so many other things. Just disregard all of that. And the discoveries near Parthia, oh man, let's not have any regard for any of that. And how about the Roman artifacts and forts that they're finding up in China? Well, just neglect that. That didn't happen either. That didn't happen either. And even more recently, in 1989, the early 90s, where this one English military man found the trek of Varus and how Varus was destroyed in like 9 AD. But that's just a bogus year. That didn't happen in 9 AD. It happened in 1430 or something. Is what you're saying. Yeah, let's throw all that out the window. And a lot of the ancient Roman forts truly became Catholic monasteries and churches. So they're scattered throughout Europe, and like the battlefield where they found Varus, where Varus was annihilated, they found what appeared to be a barbaric fort, and they also found a mass cemetery. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a battlefield and a cemetery next to it, it's undeniable It's undeniable proof that a battle did take place there. And they found all kinds of stuff that would have been just way too hard for Scaliger and his cronies to plant and bury all of these artifacts. It's just, and there's way too much dirt. And no, there's just no way that Scaliger could have done it all. He couldn't have planted it all. Just no way. Sorry. Here we have Varro on the Latin language. A few of his books are lost. And here under manuscripts, the text of the extant books of the language of Latin is believed by most scholars to rest on the manuscript here first listed. All the other manuscripts were copied from this one here, Codex Laurentianus. Okay, it is written in Langobardic characters, which is Lombardian characters, lower western type of Germanic. And it dates back to the 11th century. And it is still in the Laurentian Library at Florence. And the Laurentian Library is the same as the Medici Library. It's at the same place. But they all come from that. Here you have another reference to the 11th century down here. And this historian used it in 500 AD, copied some of his stuff on coinage. And all the others from the 15 and the 1600s, they all come from the same stock, the same parchment. On and on and on. 16th, 15th, 16th, 15th. And here there's a whole paragraph about the oldest one, the Laurentian manuscript. Talks about it. Now I'm just going to show you this page so that you can get some idea of how the rhetoricians or the grammar police just came after Varro. Here you have all the, VO, UO, and UVU, UVU, on and on and on. And he wrote this word like this, he wrote this word like that, he did this, he did that, da, 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 and there's several pages of the scholars just bickering back and forth over some of these manuscripts. And here, if we jump over to page 30, we see our hero, Joseph Scaliger, right here. He's got this book here as a reference. He's just sandwiched in. Have you seen all these names of all these guys? Not an addition, but deserving a place here, as it contains numerous textual criticism as well as other commentary, written in 1564 and published at Paris in 1565. So at least we know he wasn't traveling around at that time. He's talking about another reference here with Scaliger's book, printed at Paris. Here we have him again. Notes of Augustinus, Turnebus, Scaliger, and Popma. Just, look at these dozens and dozens of names. And especially with some of the other pages and some of the other stuff, he just gets sandwiched in with all these names. But here we have Scaliger. The Fomenkian disciples refer to themselves as the new kids. New kids on the block. Well, that's probably about the most accurate thing I've heard the preacher say. And when it comes to the Tartars, they go, well, how come all this Tartar influence and all this Tartar, the history of the Tartars and Tartary, how come it's just what? We just don't get to hear that. They leave it out of the history books. They leave it out of the history books. Well, there's a couple of things that you missed there concerning the Tartars. Number one, there never was a Tartar Empire. The only place a Tartar Empire appears anywhere is in Fomenko. There never was a Tartar Empire. If you think it was, okay, well, can you please name for me the most powerful Tartar king? Start there. Did the Tartars ever build cities? Did they ever build skyscrapers? Where's this Tartar influence, this Tartar culture that you say was so vast and so wonderful and so advanced? What Tartar ever made jewelry? Can you show me some Tartar jewelry? I'm just asking. We have jewelry, we have Gothic jewelry, Saxon jewelry, we have Greek, Roman, we even have Navajo jewelry. But did the Tartars make any jewelry? I can't. Hey, Hey, did the Tartars ever mint coins? I'm just asking. That was late. That was late. And you fail to understand that the reason that they were wiped out is because Genghis Khan came through there in the early 1200s and smoked them all. Smoked them. Killed them. Chased them up north. And he chased them as far as he could because they ran out of food for his men and his horses. So online now today, you'll see that Genghis Khan and the Tartars became allies. Well, not according to history books. They were enemies. Genghis Khan wiped them out. But online, everybody's buddy-buddy now. Everybody's buddy-buddy. I don't understand that. I don't understand that. So if you're getting your information from Wikipedia or online, you're just getting a bunch of false stuff. It's a bunch of crap. It's a bunch of cattle manure. Bovine feces. Now, I want to ask you also, can you tell me any Tartar poets? Tell me a famous Tartar work of literature. And did the Tartars build aqueducts? Did they build aqueducts to funnel water into their cities and villages? Why, the Tartars were nothing but a bunch of hungry nomads. And they never had a culture, they never had anything. It's just a bogus empire that Fomenko just created out of nothing. There ain't no Tartar empire. And the farther we go in with Fomenko, which I haven't read, but Paul's been filling me in on Fomenko, it just gets more and more ridiculous. I can't understand how any of these guys that have read Fomenko put any credit in it whatsoever. I do not understand it at all. We're just getting going good. We're just getting going good. We're going to show you some more. We're going to show. Now, I'm not saying that ancient history is perfect as we know it. There's flaws there. There's flaws here and there. And the scholars have been bickering back and forth for millennia concerning if the I was before the E, if the A is before the O, and the spelling and this and that. And I've got one book of rhetoric that goes on and on. And says at the end of the day they both say the same thing. But they're spelled different and they use different words. Who cares? Who cares? But ancient history isn't perfect. And I myself, I have busted Quintus Curtius, I busted Philo, I busted Eusebius, Josephus, busted Josephus wide open, and there's others too I have problems with, and there's passages in certain other books. Well, how did that get in there? How did that get in there? That's not right. And so there are problems with ancient history. I'll be the first one to tell you because I've busted more ancient classical historians probably than anyone would ever dare. And look what I did to ancient Roman coins. Nobody in the world could have taken that on. Nobody. And nobody would have done it. Unbelievable. Now, the Fomenkians and the disciples of Fomenko, they would have me believe that Scaliger grabbed or put together just hordes and hordes of medieval or Renaissance builders and artisans, and they went through Rome and Paris and everything, and they kept building these Roman ruins as ruins. They built the Forum as ruins. In other words, they took the rocks and they say, well, no, that rock looks too square. We need to chip off the edges of it, make it round. Let's build a huge building here, this Roman Forum, and let's put all this stuff down in the ground. Let's build these bleachers, and let's put it together as a ruin. And they did them all over Europe. Sicily, Greece, all the way over into Parthia. Yeah, that's what you would have. They would have us believe is after the Renaissance, Scaliger put it all together. He did everything. He did everything. I don't think so. I don't think so, ladies and gentlemen. We're looking at a book here, Vitruvius, books 1 through 5, volume 1, on architecture. Now, there's an issue here with Roman history and classical authors, is that many classical authors are specialized in the sciences. Vitruvius is one such character. He writes about architecture, foundations, buildings, different designs, and all this kind of stuff, where he was a construction engineer. And so how are you going to fake this in classical history. Are you going to get a construction engineer to go and look at these old buildings in Rome and tell you how they were built and then write it as Vitruvius? I don't think so. There's just no way Vitruvius or some of the others that I'm going to show you here coming up, having to deal with sciences in classic literature. This is one of the characters we see. Now, we're going to jump over here to page 7 in the preface. And you're going to see here in the British Museum they have a parchment, a Saxon script from 700s, the 8th century, probably of the 8th century. That's pretty old. That would have to be way before the Renaissance, wouldn't you say? Yeah. Now we're going to jump over to pages 32 and 33, where they're talking more about the manuscripts here. And you can see it here, how they... Here's the other one here in the British Museum, and the 700s here. Here's one from the 900s, 1000s. There's another one there from the 900s. And here, we go up here, and you can see there are more here. 1000s, on and on and on. Several. Now, the translator of this Vitruvius here says he had access to 14 different documents. 14. And I want to point this out because this is so rare. You see right here there's a C in Vitruvius. Vitruvius. There's an extra C there. That's a typo. Typos are extremely rare in the Harvard Loeb Classic Series. Extremely rare. In the brief video that we released several weeks ago, I declared that the Fomenkians and all the disciples of Fomenko, I declared that they were insane. In doing so, I leave myself wide open for you guys to call me whatever names you can think of. Call me whatever, as bad as you can, because I have determined that you guys are insane and you're idiots. You're insane idiots. And the preacher goes, he starts talking about how John Dee actually wrote Plato. Yeah. Plato didn't write Plato. John Dee did. Yeah. Yeah. And where do you get that from? Where do you get that? Well, you might tick off a lot of the Atlantis people. They might say, no. John Dee couldn't write Plato because he writes about Atlantis. But the Atlantis people don't know that there's several other ancient authors that cover Atlantis and talk about Atlantis. And I'm sure the new kids, the preacher and his disciples, they've never read any ancient authors at all. None. Zero. So they aren't going to know that. But where do you get the idea that John Dee had anything to do with Plato? I just got a question. I'm just asking. Now, another one of the disciples that the preacher was talking to, he just throws fossils out the window. All these dinosaurs you see in the museum, they're all plaster Paris. They're all plastic and this and that. Well, buddy, I've been wheeling and dealing in minerals and fossils and rocks most of my life, and I have had and sold huge vertebrae, dinosaur vertebrae, and they were irradiated. All dinosaur bones are irradiated. A lot of people don't know that. And I've been collecting minerals all my life. I know minerals like the back of my hand. I know fossils like the back of my hand. I've been on many rock hunts where I found fossils. And I've got dinosaur bones and fossils in my mineral collection. I collect this stuff. But it's all fake. All these big dinosaurs in the museum, they're fake. Hey, there's bones out there, and they do have radiation in them. That's the thing. All dinosaur bones have radiation in them. Might that be one of the reasons why they don't want them in the museum that you don't know about? A big skeleton from head to toe, it's got uranium in it, and you may not want people you didn't want to put the stuff in your pocket. Let's throw all fossils, everything about paleontology. Well, I got a bunch of paleontology and dinosaur books. I got a whole collection. You can see them on one of my videos that I went through. I may do a video on dinosaurs. But let's just throw everything about paleontology and dinosaurs right out the window. Now we're going to look at Manilius, Astronomica. Marcus Manilius, writing sometime around 0 BC or so. And he's a scientist. He writes about planets, stars, movements of the 12 signs of zodiac. A lot of modern day astrology actually stems from Manilius here. Actually 2,000 years old. And we're going to jump here to page 12. And we're going to touch a little bit more on Scaliger. More debatable is his origin, talking about Manilius. For Scaliger, he is a Roman. For Bentley, noting that the language is peculiar, thought he was Asian. Well, that's all. And Scaliger's name is peppered, through some of the page, but it's so insignificant. Well, who would have ever thought? Let's move forward to page 14. Just once, at the end of the 4th century, the text comes into full view. That's the 300s. That's old. Here's another one. Next emerges in a 10th century Bobbio catalog. Talking about Manilius. For Scaliger, he was Ovid's equal in sweetness and his superior in majesty. A judgment endorsed by Bentley, who was early 1700s. Well, they're just agreeing with each other. Picking up on page 87, here we see Scaliger, Bentley, and Houseman all applaud the poet's virtuosity in contriving to maintain an elegant variation in this versification of numbers, the list of which is set forth in table 4. There's tables and all this other kinds, especially of Manilius. Just showing you Scaliger there, no biggie. Page 106. There are extant about 30 manuscripts of Manilius. Okay, and here both are from the 11th century and descend from a common parent, though not written till the year 1417. That's important. And badly written at that. Badly written at that. Okay, and so, well, who was doing it back then? Who was doing that in 1417? Who was writing Manilius? Poggio? Here's another place where Scaliger is mentioned. For example, at this point right here in the manuscript, the Latin text gives census, a conjecture of Scaliger's for census. The reading of the manuscript, this is signified by the note 12 census. So here you see Scaliger in an argument concerning, or criticism concerning, the C or an S. This is how the rhetoricians go back and forth even today. They were doing it 500 years ago. And 1,000 years ago too. And even before then. Page 113, editions of Manilius. Talking about here, Scaliger, 1579, 1600. And he died in 1639, so he would be dead by 1655, passed on. And here Bentley mentions Scaliger again. The text marks a great advance even on Scaliger exegesis. Got another question for you, disciples of Fomenko. Who do you suppose built Trajan's column? Did Trajan build it, or did somebody else? Who did all the little intricate designs and manufactured that and set it up in downtown Rome? Who did that? Oh, you're going to have me believe that it was Scaliger and Scaliger's spies who did that. That's who did it. Scaliger and his spies. Well, Fomenko just made it up as he goes. He just made it up. And these people that believe it are just totally ignorant of what the facts really are. The only reason anyone would ever digest or masticate anything of Fomenko is because of their sheer, utter ignorance. They are shackled because of their historical ignorance. And so, but Fomenko, he didn't care. He didn't care. He just made it up. They're making up that Napoleon Bonaparte was really Pope Benedict II or something like that. Well, in a few years, they're going to have you believing that that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was Queen Elizabeth I. Make it up as you go. And it gets more and more ridiculous as you go along. Now, I don't believe that you guys belong in a scholastic straitjacket. You're close.
Poggio?
In Fomenkian chronology, or Fomenkology, there's a lot of history that you just got to throw out the window. You can start with Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, he never existed. He might have been some Spanish monk or something that lived over in Barcelona. Charlemagne, forget him. He was the Pope Boniface the Ninth. Yeah, just make that up. All of the battles between the Vikings and the Saxons up in England, and all of the crap that happened up in Scandinavia. It didn't happen. It's just a figment of our imagination. This is all an illusion. It's all an illusion. And all those battles and all that ancient history that happened up in that, well, it wasn't right until Scaliger came along and put the chronology together. Did he attach a year to it, I suppose? Or did he collate the pages of the book? And I mean, all I can see as far as chronology goes is that Scaliger wrote commentaries. I mean, just show what did he do with chronology that is not in Fomenko? What did he do? All I see in the old books is, yeah, he's responsible for chronology of what? Of what? Now, Scaliger and his spies did all of the of everything. Now, constantly, Scaliger, living in Paris, is accused of creating all of his manuscripts and his chronology and I guess his criticisms and commentaries while he was at Paris. But on the other hand, we have to admit that Scaliger traveled all through Europe, planting tablets, building ruins, and doing everything with his artisans and spies. Well, which way was it? Was he hanging out in Paris, or was he traveling? Now, he did speak many, many languages. That's a given. That's a given. Well, did he learn everything in Paris? Is that where he just stayed and wrote commentaries and put the chronology together? But on the other hand, how did he travel? When did he find time to travel to all these places throughout Europe and Asia Minor and plant these tablets and all of this information and build all of these ancient ruins in the 1600s and make them look so old? And let's just forget about the Tibetans and the libraries at the monasteries in Tibet. They probably got the oldest books in the world that are bound books. I think they've got some that are like 12, 13, 1400 years old. Well, did Scaliger and his spies put them there? Is that what they did? Is that what they did? And back in ancient times in the 1500s, paper and ink wasn't like it is today. Yeah, people didn't have 20 or 30 ink pens in their cup like I got. Or you couldn't just go down to Office Depot and buy a thick ream of paper. You couldn't do that. This was very expensive. And different paper makers had different styles and different chemicals that they used to make paper. And a lot of times if somebody's writing a manuscript and they made a mistake, instead of trashing the whole sheet of paper, they just marked through it with a line and picked the sentence up again. It was a lot cheaper to do that, wasn't it? Oh, I forgot. I put the I before the E instead of the E before the I. So now I got to trash this whole sheet of paper because there's a boo-boo in it? It didn't happen like that. And going back to some of the ancient history that Fomenko has to throw out the window, all these archaeology books that I've got, these big, beautiful archaeology books, all these vast cities, they were built in the 1600s, weren't they? Yep, 1400s. That's when they come back. They'll just throw all archaeology. Whew, throw it out the window. Atlas of Ancient Egypt. Great book. I think this book's Paul's. Let's just throw it out the window. Throw it out the window. And right here, this is a very important book here. the Bindolanda writing tablets. This one book right here just crushes Fomenko. And these were found in England in the mid-70s, early 80s. All these tablets written in archaic Latin. Written in archaic Latin. Well, how do you suppose Scaliger learned how to write archaic Latin? Good question. He learned it by reading Varro. The same Varro that you accuse him of creating. Fomenko says that Scaliger created these guys, so Scaliger learned ancient Latin and then prescribed it as Varro. So if I invented ancient Latin characters and ancient Latin script, I wouldn't give Varro the credit, would you? No, I'd say I'm Harry Hubbard, I invented ancient Latin. Varro didn't have nothing to do with it. But in the remains of old Latin in there, oh man, they're just all over the place. All over the place. And then with Cato and Cicero, and those were the beginnings of how Latin just began to flourish in the 1st century BC. So, where do you stop with the bovine manure? Where do you stop with the cattle feces?
Poggio?
This is volume 1 of DIODORUS, SICULUS. One of my favorite classical authors. Now he's writing about Roman history. Now, I'm going to show you page 15 here in the introduction. I'm just going to scroll it down here, talking about the chronological table. And this gives a little more detail of how this particular writer had put together his own chronology, using a couple of other guys' chronology, comparing the Trojan War and the Olympiads with Roman dating, and how they all came to this conclusion. First Olympiad is this. Okay, so they were doing their best to keep the timelines balanced. That's on page 15. Next is page 23. The following are the more important editions. Talk manuscripts and editions of DIODORUS, SICULUS. Poggio Bracciolini, Latin translation of books published in Bologna in 1472, and many times thereafter at Paris. And then you have Vincentius, Heinrich Stephanus, and Rodoman. The edition of Stephanus with a Latin translation, indices and chronological tables, 1604. All right, now, either one of these guys, Poggio, Vincentius, Stephanus, and Rodoman, could have been a better Scaliger and done better than what Fomenko is accusing Scaliger of doing. Here you have 1, 2, 3, 4 more potentials. Page 25 just shows manuscripts, 1400s, 1400s, 1100s, 1000s, 15, 14, 15. Okay? Just showing you those. That's DIODORUS, SICULUS.
Poggio? Who in the world is he?
And this is Frontius. He was writing late 1st century AD, Stratagems and Aqueducts. He was a military commander. He was actually consul for some time. He was governor of Great Britain for some time, and then proconsul again. And he wrote the strategies of the ancient Roman armies and the ancient Greek armies for the contemporary generals to read of that day. And he was also a civil engineer, and later in life he was placed in charge of the aqueducts of Rome. So he built aqueducts. He built them and maintained them, and he also wrote military strategies. So here we're getting more into science than we are actually to history. So there's no way you're gonna cram all that into somebody who knows how to write Latin today. It's just not going to happen. Or even in the Renaissance, it's just not going to happen. You're not going to take some Joe Blow that's a copyist or that knows history and put him in a situation where he's discussing battle strategies and building of aqueducts. It just ain't going to happen. Common sense. Jumping over to pages 28 and 29 here, it's talking about the 13th century. After the 13th century, this was put with Frontinus in one codex. Parchment of the 19th century, or 10th, is now in the British Museum. Well, that's 8 or 900 AD, and it's still in the British Museum. Okay, and here's the other one here. Here's another one dating back to the 9th century. Picking up on page 30, the Codex Parisinus is a parchment dating from the end of the 10th or the beginning of the 11th century. This is pages 32 and 33. As early as 1425, Poggio Bracciolini had learned that at Monte Cassino there was a copy of Diodorus of Frontinus. But it was not until he visited the monastery in 1429 that the manuscript was actually found. It was carried off to Rome, copied, and returned to Monte Cassino, where it still remains. It is an original manuscript in the sense that at the time of its discovery, no other manuscript of the work was known, nor has any since come to light, excepting those derived from copies made by Poggio at the time. 8 of these copies are described by Buchler. And here we have another critique here. Pollini places its date at the end of the 13th or the beginning of the 14th century, while the catalog of the library at Monte Cassino assigns it to the end of the 11th or the beginning of the 12th. Here we have Silius Italicus, and you'll understand why I've chosen some of these specific authors to talk about. And he wrote Punica. He wrote about Carthage, the history of Carthage. And he was living and writing 1st century AD. He was consul of Rome, and I think it was 68. And he's a very special person. Silius, he actually purchased Cicero's Tuscany Villa, his villa there. He was a big fan of Cicero. And so he purchased Cicero's vacation home up in Tuscany. And he also purchased, believe it or not, the tomb of Virgil. He's like collecting major Roman artifacts, isn't he? Cicero's villa would be a nice artifact to have. Picking up on page 16, there's something very interesting here under manuscripts, editions, and translations. In 1416 or 1417, see, there's our date again, during the Council of Constance, Poggio, the learned Florentine, who unearthed so many Latin authors, found, probably at St. Gall, Upper Switzerland, a manuscript of Silius. A copy of this was taken by Poggio or one of his companions. And we have other references to Poggio and his companions, or people that worked for Poggio and traveled with him. We don't have that with Scaliger, but we do with this guy. And from that copy, all the existing manuscripts are descended. So here's another ancient writer, Silius Italicus, that this guy here single-handedly brought into the next centuries. He brought it out of obscurity completely. Now you guys, hang on to your hat, because now the secret agent is going to take you and introduce you to somebody that for some reason you guys just didn't come across. His name is Poggio. Poggio. Let's meet Poggio. This is from 1879, volume 13, page 637, under Poggio Bracciolini. and it's hard to get inside the seam close to the center of these books. They're just murderous, very hard to push down on. I thought I was going to break the scanner. Born in 1380, died in 1459. In 1414, he attended Pope John the 23rd to the Council of Constance as apostolic secretary. In 1416, he engaged in searching the ancient monasteries for manuscripts and recovered 7 orations of Cicero and a great number of other classical writings. And I'm just going to scroll this down here. Talking about how he moved to Florence, wrote a history of Florence, was elected as historiographer. 1899, page 815. Poggio with all of his names here. Born in Tuscany, 1380. But right here it says he was born in 1381. So you make just go figure. Died in 1459. A noted Italian scholar and author in the Renaissance period. He was secretary of the Papal Curia, became historiographer to Florence and chancellor in 1453. Discovered many classical manuscripts. The first half of the 15th century, get this, has been sometimes called the age of Poggio Bracciolini. Well, why didn't everybody know that? Which it expresses not very inaccurately as to his literary life, since he was born in 1381 and died in 1459. But it seems to involve too high a compliment. The chief merit of Poggio was his diligence, aided by good fortune, in recovering lost works of Roman literature that lay gathering mold in the repositories of convents and monasteries. Hence, we owe to this one man 8 orations of Cicero, the other one said 7, a complete quintillion, Columella, part of Lucretius, 3 books of Valerius Flaccus, Silius, Italicus, Ammianus, Marcellinus, Tertullian, and several less important writers. 12 comedies of Plautus were also recovered in Germany through his directions. Okay, through his directions. What does that mean? That implies that at some point he was some kind of boss. He had guys that worked underneath him. Picking up in 1929 Britannica, volume 18, page 114. He's under Poggio. He studied Latin under John of Ravenna and Greek under Manuel Chrysolaris. And his distinguished abilities and his dexterity as a copyist of manuscripts got him noticed by the chief scholars of Florence. His functions were those of a secretary. This apostolic secretary, heart and soul, devoted to the resuscitation of classical studies amid conflicts of popes and anti-popes, cardinals and councils, etc., etc. Thus, when his duties called him to Constance in 1414, he employed his leisure in exploring the libraries of Swiss and Swabian convents. The treasures he brought to light at Reichenau, Weingarten, and above all, St. Gall restored many lost masterpieces of Latin literature and supplied students with the texts of authors whose works had hitherto been accessible only in mutilated copies. In one of his epistles, he describes how he recovered Quintilian, part of Valerius Flaccus, and the commentaries of Ascanius Pedianus at St. Gall. Manuscripts of Lucretius, Columella, Silius Italicus, Manilius, and Vitruvius were unearthed, copied by his hand, and communicated to the learned. Wherever Poggio went, he carried on the same industry of research. Okay? Wherever he went, he carried on the same industry. That leads me to believe that he had an entourage at some point. At Langres, he discovered Cicero's oration for Cassina. At Monte Cassino, a manuscript of Frontius. He also could boast of having recovered Ammianus, Marcellinus, Nonius, Marcellus, Probus, Flavius Caper, and Eutyches. If a codex could not be obtained by fair means, he was ready to use fraud, as when he bribed a monk to abstract a Livy and an Ammianus from the convent library of Hersfeld. Poggio embraced the whole sphere of contemporary studies and distinguished himself as an orator, a writer of rhetorical treatises, a panegyrist of the dead. Now, panegyrist of the dead, that means he wrote eulogies, tombstones, scripts for funerals, headstones, etc., etc. A translator from Greek, an epistolographer and grave historian, that means a cemetery historian, grave historian, and a facetious compiler of fabliaux, which means satirical comedy in Latin. And he also wrote brilliant illustrations, like memes maybe. Poggio's History of Florence, written in avowed imitation of Livy's manner, requires separate mention. And I have to point out here too, avowed imitation of Livy's manner. When I'm writing my books, I also try to pattern myself after Livy. Livy is my favorite ancient writer, in so much as the way his work just flows. It flows so really good. And it's very fast reading, very easy to read. I suggest anyone, and we're going to see it here in a moment, again, Livy's name's going to pop up, but anyone who's interested in studying Roman history, I suggest Livy. Pick up the works of Livy. You can't go wrong there. Among his contemporaries, Poggio passed for one of the most formidable, polemical, or gladiatorial rhetoricians. Now, whatever a gladiatorial rhetorician is, I'm not sure. What is it? These scholars go out and into the middle of the Colosseum and with swords and armor? I don't think so. A considerable section of his extant works are invectives, which means insults. At the behest of Nicholas V, he covered the anti-pope Felix with scurrilous abuse. The anti-pope. Anyone to study the anti-popes is just great. It's a lot of fun. Anybody can go and jump into the anti-popes. That's a big issue. Okay, now in 1452, he retired to Florence, and he was appointed chancellor, and later became historiographer to the Republic. He'd already had built a house there and decorated it with antique sculpture, coins, and inscriptions. He collected ancient artifacts and ancient coins. Now get this. In 1435, okay, Poggio in 1435 is 55 years old. In 1435, he married a girl of age 18 named Vagina. I'm confused. Okay, of this famous bloodline. And now, don't fret, he's 55, she's 18. They've been dating for 3 or 4 years. I love this. His declining days were spent in the discharge of his hormonal fluids in his office in Florence. That's right. His declining days were spent in the discharge. That's a powerful word there, discharge. Boy, ain't that the truth? He discharged. This is taken from volume 11, New Catholic Encyclopedia. We're going to jump over to page 465 here. Okay, he first started out with his family in Florence, and he was able to pay for instruction in Latin from Giovanni Ravenna from fees earned in copying manuscripts. So he was already copying manuscripts before he actually started learning the heavy-duty Latin. He probably learned Greek, of which he never had full mastery of. In 1404, at the age of 24, he entered the service of the Apostolic Chancery during the pontificate of Boniface the Ninth, serving as a scriptor. He held the post as a layman under 8 different popes for almost 50 years. His proficiency in Latin, epistolography, an accomplishment much admired in his time, exerted considerable influence on the development of the curial style of the papal chancery. Poggio's most enduring claim to distinction rests on his remarkable industry in recovering manuscripts of Latin authors in monastic libraries such as Weingarten, Reichenau, and St. Gall, where he found the complete text of Quintilian's book here, which he copied and forwarded to Bruni. His history of Florence, modeled on Livy's history of Rome, is useful but labors under the defects of analytic approach. In his translations of Greek authors such as Diodorus Siculus, Lucian, and Xenophon, Poggio's defective knowledge of Greek is all too evident. Poggio's book here, description of downtown Rome, and his interest in collecting Latin inscriptions give him a place of honor at the beginnings of classical archaeology. Right here, signed autograph letter of Giovanni Francisco Poggio Bracciolini. Now we're going to look at it. This is an autograph letter of his. I don't know how good it's going to show up, but the only thing I want you to notice is how perfect it is. No ink blotches, no scratches out, no anything. This guy had incredible handwriting. Thought you might like to see that. Poggio. Now I put this list together here so that you could see the classical writers that Poggio is either single-handedly responsible for or in part, in major part. Here they are. Check that out. Some of my favorites in here. And this isn't all just Roman history. Xenophon's writing Persian history. FRONTIUS, as we mentioned, he writes stratagems and aqueducts. Manilius is cosmology. Tertullian is more about Christian and the early church. Vitruvius is about buildings and architecture. On and on and on. Just a fantastic, boy, to have that right there underneath your belt, I can't understand why there aren't a lot more conspiracies concerning Poggio. Just saying. I've got some advice for the new kids and Fomenkians. You don't have to stay on that Fomenko Scaliger ship. You can jump ships. You can create your own ship, your own timeline, and use your own classical copyists however you wish. And do what Fomenko did, just make it up as you go. You can actually be the new Fomenko. And instead of Scaliger, just pick somebody else. Just pick somebody else. Take your pick. It'll be a lot of fun. I'm on your side. I'm trying to help you guys out. Educate you a little bit. So thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this. And until next time, peace out, brothers and sisters. Secret Ancient Man. Secret Ancient Man. Secret Ancient Man. He's crushing his opponents with every book he can.